Every family has a basement, a place where the unspeakable is kept. She thought she had buried the past with her father's ashes, until a knock at the door before dawn brought it all back. Love, guilt, and truth now stand together, under one roof, and only when the final noonday light falls will we know who has truly been saved. Before we begin this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. My name is Alyssa. I'm 55 years old, and what I'm about to tell you today will forever change the way you see your own family. The first knock sounded like a crack, splitting through the quiet mirror of dawn. 3 short, firm, unhurried beats. I was sitting at the kitchen table where the soft yellow light fell over my father's coat, hanging on the back of the opposite chair, still in the same place since the day he died. The scent of cedar, tobacco, and a faint trace of his cologne lingered in the air, a fragrance that made the room feel like a museum, preserving someone who had long since gone. I still wasn't used to his absence. Every morning, I brewed coffee, waited for the warmth to spread through my palms, then set the cup down at the same spot on the table. The coffee never went cold, because I never finished it. Everything in the house was too orderly, so perfectly arranged it felt unnatural, as if tidiness could somehow fill the void. I told myself every day, everything is perfect, except there's nothing left to live for. Then came the second knock, this time louder, clearer, enough to catch my breath mid-chest. I looked up at the clock. 4:53 a.m. No one knocked at this hour unless it was bad news, or something that couldn't wait. I walked toward the door, my bare feet cold against the tile. When my hand touched the doorknob, a vague feeling washed over me. Not quite fear, more like recognition. Whatever stood on the other side was part of a story I wasn't ready to hear again. The door opened, and Gabriel Stone was standing there, tall, lean, his face hollow under the yellow porch light. Rain clung to his shoulders, running in thin lines down his wrists. His right hand was bleeding, dark drops falling onto the concrete. "Gabriel?" I whispered, my voice hoarse after a night spent speaking to no one. He looked at me, eyes deep, wet, and heavy. For a moment, he seemed like someone who had just escaped a nightmare, but hadn't fully woken. "Don't go to the office today," he said, his voice low, strangled, blending with the rain's patter. "Just trust me." The words froze me in place. Outside, the dawn hadn't broken. The wind carried the smell of rust and damp earth. I looked at his bleeding hand, then into those eyes, where regret and exhaustion met. A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, from recognition, instinctive, wordless, a sense that his pain and mine somehow shared the same scent. I stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in." Gabriel lingered on the threshold for a long moment. Rain dripped from his hair, pooling on the floor under the dim light. Finally, he stepped in, leaving behind a trail of mud and the cold breath of night. The kitchen glowed faintly. The light fell on his pale skin, his bluish lips. I poured a glass of water and set it before him. He didn't drink, only stared at the rising steam as if searching inside it for an answer. "I shouldn't have come," he murmured. "But you did," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "Sit." He sat down, his shoulder brushing against my father's coat. His eyes paused there. "You still keep it." "I can't put it away." "Why not?" I looked at the coat. "Because if I do, it means he's really gone." He nodded slightly, saying nothing more. Silence stretched thick as smoke. I could hear the clock ticking, and my heartbeat faltering. Gabriel clenched his injured hand. I saw the wound split again, blood welling anew. Instinct made me rise and grab the first aid kit from the shelf. "Give me your hand." He looked up, hesitated, then extended it. When the cotton soaked in peroxide touched his skin, it hissed faintly, the scent of antiseptic curling into the air. He didn't flinch, only shut his eyes, his lips pressed tight, as if holding himself still. "What happened to you?" "It's just old business." His voice was dry, each word scraped out of his throat. I wrapped the bandage carefully around his hand, smoothing the edge. My movements were slow, deliberate, as if doing it too quickly might make him vanish. When it was done, I stepped back. "There, the bleeding stopped." He nodded faintly. "Thank you." I studied him more closely. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, eyes clouded, shoulders bowed, yet his voice was strangely gentle. "You knew my father, didn't you?" I asked. He was silent for a long time. "Once," he said finally. "He used to talk about you. Said you weren't afraid of heights, only of the silence between two people." My chest tightened. Father had said that to me when I was little, one afternoon as we climbed onto the roof to fix the wind gauge. Only he understood my fear of silence, the kind that forces you to fill it with words just to hide from yourself. I turned away, afraid I might cry. "Why are you here, Gabriel?" He drew a deep breath. "Alyssa, you have to promise me. Don't go to the company today. Don't talk to anyone. There are things you don't know. And once you do, you won't be the same." I stood still, my heart constricting. "What are you talking about?" He looked at me. That strange gaze. Not threatening, not evasive, just full of pity. "Because you don't know everything about your father," he said. "And others know far too much." A coldness spread through me. For months, I'd lived surrounded by rumors that he'd falsified the accounts, that he was under investigation, that he couldn't take it and ended his own life. I'd tried to believe those were just cruel whispers. But now, hearing Gabriel, someone who had known him, every comfort I'd clung to shattered. Gabriel rose and walked toward the door. "I can't say more, but you have to trust me." "And if I don't?" I asked, my voice low. "Then you'll step into the storm your father left behind," he said, eyes distant. "And I don't know if you'll come back out." I didn't stop him. Only when his hand was on the doorknob did I ask, "Where will you go?" "To the place where the past is still open." He turned back, his smile thin as a cut. "And when you're ready, face it. Just not today." He left. The door closed so softly it barely made a sound, the kitchen filled with damp air. I sat down again, eyes tracing the trail of raindrops he'd left on the floor, footprints blurring slowly. Outside, dawn began to slice a thin line of light through the curtain, touching my father's coat. The glow made the worn fabric shimmer faintly, as if he were still sitting there, quietly watching. I picked up Gabriel's blood-stained cloth, folded it, and set it on the table. The red mark was still wet, small, but it looked like a warning. In that instant, I felt as though I was holding the first fragment of a secret too large to name. The room was thick with the smell of antiseptic, rain, and old wood. I glanced at the clock. 5:50 a.m. Time kept moving. But I knew, from the moment that door opened, my life had shifted course. I stood, drew the curtains open, and let the light flood in. The house was no longer quiet, but it wasn't dead either. I brewed another cup of coffee, this time placing it slightly off-center on the coaster. A small detail, but enough to tell me perfection was over. Through the window, the street shimmered gray with rain. Droplets fell slowly, like they were keeping time for the change that had begun. I whispered softly, as if to my father, "I heard the knock, Dad." And as the last light of dawn spread across the wall, I knew that knock hadn't come to end something. It had come to begin. The next morning, I woke to the patter of rain on the tin roof, a sound I once loved, now beating like the rhythm of worry. Sleep had been fragmented, haunted by flickers of dreams. My father's face, his office, and Gabriel's pleading eyes that lingered like fingerprints pressed into my memory. I sat up, leaning against the headboard. The room was dim, though the clock showed only 8. Through the rain-streaked window, I could see wet branches trembling in the wind, as if to remind me that time was still moving, even if my heart was stuck in last night. I tried to trick myself with routine. Brew coffee, clean the kitchen, wipe down the table. Each motion was precise, practiced, like a play performed hundreds of times. But today, everything was offbeat. The cup slipped from my hand, shattered on the floor, like something inside me had just cracked too. I knelt, picking up the shards. The edge nicked my finger, a thin line of blood rising to the surface. I stared at it, remembering Gabriel's injured hand from the night before, and realized wounds have a way of finding each other, even when they never planned to meet. I sank down onto the floor, biting my lip to keep from crying. Then, in my head, I heard my father's voice, deep and weary. "You don't have to understand everything, Alyssa. Some truths are meant to be buried with the dead." But I was never good at burying things. Not people, not feelings, least of all doubts. I washed my hands, bandaged the cut, then looked at my phone. Half of me wanted to call Gabriel. The other half thought of Sophie, my sister. She always knew how to handle things. Rational, practical, even ruthless when necessary. I dialed her number. The phone rang 4 times before Sophie's voice came through, dry and distant, as if she wasn't talking to her own sister. "Alyssa? What is it?" "I just wanted to ask if you've heard anything about Dad's company. About the investigations?" Silence hummed for a beat. Then Sophie replied curtly, "Don't start that again." "But there's no but." Her voice was cold, glassy. "Dad's story is over. The more you dig, the more you'll hurt yourself." I bit my lip. Someone came to see me. Gabriel Stone. Silence again. I could hear Sophie's breathing, sharp then restrained. "That name, say it again." "Gabriel Stone. He worked with Dad, didn't he?" Sophie's tone shifted, each word measured. "You shouldn't see him. He's someone who should never appear in your life again." "Why?" "Because he belongs to the past. And Dad's past isn't something we want to relive." Her voice trembled faintly, then hardened. "Listen to me, Alyssa. Stay away from him. And don't go to the company." The call ended abruptly. I stared at the black screen, my pale reflection staring back. Eyes dull, expression blank. Part of me wanted to obey Sophie. But another part, the one gasping with curiosity and fear, whispered that she was hiding something. I stood and opened the wooden drawer where Dad used to keep small belongings. Inside was an old handkerchief, embroidered with the initials AS. I'd always thought it was his, but last night, Gabriel had given me one exactly like it, except his was frayed and stained with old blood in the corner. I held it in my palm, warmth seeping through my skin. The image of Gabriel standing under the porch light in the rain came back. His eyes, his voice, his plea echoing in my mind. Just trust me. I didn't know what to believe, but I knew that my father, Sophie, and Gabriel were bound together by some invisible thread that pulled painfully tight inside my chest. By noon, the rain stopped. Weak light filtered into the kitchen, falling on the floor where Gabriel's footprints had been the night before. I walked over and paused. Everything still smelled faintly of him. Rain, blood, and something profoundly human. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my contacts. No number for Gabriel. I only knew him through my father, through the way Dad used to mention him at dinner. He's brilliant, but he lets his emotions lead him too much. Back then, I hadn't understood. Now I did. Some people follow their emotions until they're devoured by them. That afternoon, I walked outside, down the narrow path to the lake, the place Dad used to take us fishing every weekend. The water was still, the sky a dull gray. I sat on the stone bench, listening to children's laughter in the distance. A boy laughed loudly, the sound echoing, and it sent a chill through me. It reminded me of Dad, of how he used to call me Little Storm. I once believed I was the gust he'd raised to be strong, but now I felt like the wreckage left behind by the wind. I took the handkerchief from my pocket and unfolded it. The fabric was worn, the dried blood faint. I didn't know why Gabriel had given it to me, or why my father once kept one just like it. But something in me whispered that the cloth was important, a thread linking the three of us and our pasts. I gripped it tightly. A cold gust swept through, bending the trees. I looked up at the gray sky and wondered, if the past truly wants to stay buried, why does it always find a way back? By the time I returned home, dusk had fallen. On the kitchen table, the old handkerchief still lay there. I placed it in a drawer beside my father's coat. I knew I was doing exactly what Sophie had warned me not to, keeping what should have been thrown away. But maybe, only by keeping it, could I find the truth. Night descended. Outside, the wind slipped through the doorframe, making the curtains tremble. I sat at the table and opened my father's notebook. The pages were blank, except for a faint line on the cover. Truth doesn't disappear. It simply waits for someone brave enough to face it. I closed the notebook. The room suddenly felt unbearably cold. In my head, Sophie's voice, Gabriel's voice, and my father's voice swirled together, echoing into a hollow roar. I realized then it was the silence itself that was the real enemy, and I couldn't stay silent anymore. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the street shrouded in night. The rain had stopped, but mist rose from the pavement. Under the streetlight, I thought I saw a figure, faint, standing still. My heart clenched. I blinked. No one was there. I let out a shaky laugh, part sigh. "If you want me to trust you, Gabriel," I whispered, "then give me a reason." I closed the window and turned back to the table. My father's coat still hung there, unmoving. I laid a hand on the collar and murmured, "I'll find out, Dad, no matter how much it hurts." And I knew. Sleep wouldn't come that night. The darkness had risen from the past, and it had come to claim what was left unfinished. The morning began with an artificial calm. Pale sunlight slipped through the curtains, laying a cold, mist-like sheen across the wooden floor. I made coffee, the same cup, the same taste, except my hand trembled slightly. I hadn't slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face in the dark, half smiling, half still, as if he knew something I did not. The smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen, but it couldn't drown out the clammy damp left over from last night's storm. On the table, Gabriel's old handkerchief lay motionless, stained a faint brown by dried blood. I didn't know why I was still keeping it. Perhaps because it proved that last night wasn't a dream. When the phone rang, Gabriel was the first person I thought of. My heart pounded, but a different name lit up the screen. Attorney Whitaker, Office of Finance and Probate. I hesitated a few seconds before answering. Hello, Miss Alyssa. The man's voice was gentle, but each word weighed heavy. I'm calling regarding the estate file and pension fund of the late Mr. Jonathan Hale, your father. I froze. Yes. What do you want to say? An internal investigation has just been reopened. Certain documents indicate possible irregularities in the management of the Hale and Partners Pension Fund. We think you should know. I felt the blood drain from my face. Irregularities? What do you mean? I can't say much over the phone, he replied. But some new evidence has been found, and someone has agreed to cooperate with the investigative committee. I think the name will interest you. What name? He paused for a beat, then spoke slowly. Gabriel Stone. Everything in the kitchen seemed to stop. I could hear the clock ticking, my heart thudding in my chest, and my breath catching in my throat. He has filed to be a witness? I asked, my voice rasping. Yes, the lawyer confirmed. He says he has evidence related to misdirected funds, and that he wants to clarify the matter, because a family member was affected by these irregularities. I tightened my grip on the phone. A flash of light flickered through my mind and vanished just as quickly. Suddenly, everything he'd said last night made sense. Don't go to the company today. Just trust me. Thank you, I said, my voice unsteady. I need time to understand this. The call ended. The house fell quiet again. But the silence was no longer peaceful. It felt like a wet blanket pressed over my chest, heavy and suffocating. I looked out the window. The sky was clearer than yesterday, but the light was so bright it hurt my eyes. I felt caught between two shores. On one side, the image of the exemplary father I'd always believed in. On the other, a growing suspicion spreading like a crack in a wall. I walked into the living room where an old family photo hung. In it, my father stood in the center, Sophie and I on either side, our smiles strained but warm. I had never noticed that his hand on my shoulder wasn't gentle. It was gripping. Now, I didn't know whether that was protection or his way of keeping a secret within reach. At noon, I didn't eat. I just sat there, watching the light crawl slowly across the table and then disappear. I felt as if someone were watching me from outside the door. When I turned to look, no one was there. Only the wind nudged the window, making it shiver. Then the doorbell rang. I stopped short, my heart hammering. For a split second, I thought of Gabriel. I went to the door, hand on the knob. When I opened it, it was him. Standing on the porch, damp with sweat, his eyes layered with the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. You, I began, but he spoke quickly. You got the call, didn't you? I nodded, cautious. From Attorney Whitaker, they said you're cooperating with the investigation. Gabriel exhaled. Exhaustion etched across his face. I don't mean to betray anyone, but you deserve to know the truth. What truth? He stepped inside, lowering his voice. Your father once managed a pension fund for the employees. My father was among them. When the company hit a crisis, the money vanished. People like my father lost everything. He couldn't bear it, and he died that year. I took a step back. You're saying my father. I'm not saying he took the money. Gabriel cut in, his voice trembling. But he knew, and he stayed silent, maybe to protect the company's reputation, or because he believed he could fix it. But the damage was still done. The world around me felt like it was splitting apart, memories dropping like shards of glass. I remembered the night before my father died, how he didn't eat and just sat in his study until late. I knocked, and he called through the door, "I need time, Alyssa." I thought it was fatigue. Now I understood. It was guilt. "Why didn't you say something earlier?" I asked, my voice on the verge of breaking. "Because I used to want to hate you," he said, eyes lowered. "You were the daughter of the man who ruined my family. But then, when I met you, I realized you were a victim too." The air between us thickened. I looked at him, the man who had just delivered an indirect confession for my father, and yet left me unable to hate him. In the dim afternoon light, I could see the pain in his eyes, not the pain of winner or loser, but of a survivor. I turned away, my voice slightly shaking. If my father did wrong, I want to know exactly where he went wrong. I can't keep living halfway between love and suspicion. Gabriel stepped closer and placed a small envelope on the table. These are copies of his financial records. I kept them, though I should have turned everything in. What's in there? Will make you see him differently. Not entirely bad, but no longer the man you thought he was. I stared at the envelope like it was a ticking bomb. Why give it to me? Because I believe you need to see with your own eyes, not through anyone else's words. He paused, drawing a deep breath, the way I once needed to. He spoke, then moved toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back, his voice hoarse. "Truth isn't for revenge, Alyssa. It's for release." The door closed. I picked up the envelope, my hand gone ice cold. The room fell utterly still, save for the quickening beat of my heart. I opened it. Inside were copies of ledgers, a few memos, and a sheet of paper in my father's handwriting. Every decision has its price. If you're reading this, it means you're ready to forgive. A tear fell onto the edge of the page, blurring the ink. I folded it and held it tight. Outside, the sun was setting, and the last light slid across the family photo on the wall, splitting my father's face in two, half in light, half in shadow. I sat down, resting my forehead on the table, tears spilling without end. From the deepest place inside me, I knew this was only the beginning of the real storm. The next morning was clear and cold. I sat by the window, watching the dew bead along the glass, shimmering like fragments of memories that refused to fade. The envelope Gabriel had left still lay on the table, its edges curled from the damp air. I hadn't dared to open it again. Something inside me feared that if I read one more line, my father would leave me once more. This time, for good. I turned from the table, about to make coffee, when I heard a knock at the door. I didn't need to look. There are footsteps you recognize from far away, because your heartbeat has already learned their rhythm. When I opened the door, Gabriel stood there. His hand was wrapped in fresh bandages, but his face was pale, his eyes hollowed by exhaustion. The faint sunlight fell through the porch roof, forming a thin halo around him, as if he didn't quite belong to this world. "I need to talk," he said, voice hoarse. I stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "How's your hand?" "Better," he replied, though I saw the small wince when he moved. "Sit down." I opened the cabinet, took out the first aid kit, and set it on the table. "It's not healed yet. Take off the bandage. Let me see." He looked like he wanted to refuse, then fell silent and obeyed. When I unwrapped the bandage, the wound flushed red, the skin tender and thin. I soaked cotton with antiseptic. "This might sting." "It's fine," he said. When the cotton touched his skin, he gripped the edge of the table. I tried not to let my hand tremble. The smell of alcohol mixed with the old wood of the kitchen table, creating a familiar scent, sharp and quiet. I wrapped the bandage slowly, each turn of the white cloth circling his wrist, like an unspoken promise. "You should rest for a few days," I said. "You look like you're about to collapse." "Can't," he murmured. "There's too much left undone. And I need to tell you more about your father." I looked up, meeting his weary gaze. "You've already said enough about him, Gabriel." "No." He shook his head. "I've talked about his mistakes, not about the man." He told me that years ago my father had helped him. A young apprentice, lost and burdened by an old family debt. My father had given him a chance to start over, even knowing he was the son of someone who had been wronged in an earlier deal. "He said," Gabriel recounted softly, "sometimes the only way to atone is to teach someone else how not to repeat your mistakes." I said nothing. His words warmed me and weighed me down all at once. "He wasn't a bad man," Gabriel continued slowly, "just one trapped between honor and compassion. And I think he chose the wrong side." I looked at him, my thoughts spinning. "And what about you? Which side are you on?" He gave a faint smile. "I don't know anymore. I thought I wanted justice. Now I just want an ending." The words hurt, not because of what he said, but because I understood. I wanted an ending too, though I wasn't sure whether it was to the anger or to the emptiness that anger left behind. I stood and went to the wardrobe, pulling out a new sweater. "Put this on. Your shirt's stained with blood." He hesitated. "You don't have to." "I didn't ask," I interrupted. "Just wear it." He took it, his fingers trembling slightly against the fabric. For a moment, he smiled, the first smile since we met again. "Thank you," he murmured, slipping it on. In that instant, the air in the room shifted. The cold softened, the light gentled. I sat down across from him, and a strange feeling rose inside me, both familiar and distant. "Gabriel," I said quietly, "do you think people can make up for the mistakes their parents made?" He looked at me, eyes heavy with sorrow. "Not completely, but they can live differently, so the mistake doesn't happen again." I bowed my head, nodding slightly. In my mind, I thought of the small savings I'd kept, money set aside for the day I might leave the city. Now it felt like the only thing I could use to repair even a fraction of what my father had broken. That evening, I sat at my desk typing a letter to Attorney Whitaker's office. I wrote that I, Alyssa Hale, would voluntarily repay part of the missing pension funds using my own assets. I didn't know if it would be enough, but it was a beginning. When I pressed send, I felt as though an old skin had finally been shed. Gabriel appeared at the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame. "What did you just do?" "I'm fixing a piece of it," I said. "My father's mistake. My own, maybe ours, who knows?" He was silent for a moment, then stepped closer. "You don't have to do that." "No," I said softly. "I do." I need to believe that doing the right thing still matters, even if no one ever sees it. He looked at me for a long time. His gaze unsettled me, as if he could see straight through every layer of defense I'd built. Then he said quietly, "Thank you for trusting me, Alyssa." I smiled faintly. "I'm not sure I trust you. I just know I can't hate you anymore." He lowered his head slightly, his voice almost a confession. "Neither can I." We sat in silence. The kitchen light cast a soft glow across the floor. A fragile calm settled between us, the kind that comes before the wind stirs the lake. When Gabriel left, he paused at the door and turned back. "You once asked which side I was on," he said. "Now I know. I'm on the side of those trying to live decently, even if it's too late." The door closed, and I watched his shadow fade into the dusk. That night, I didn't cry. I sat at the table, holding a cup of coffee, watching the lamplight reflect off the wooden surface. Nothing was resolved yet, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the truth. I opened my father's envelope, slowly this time. Between the papers, a small note slipped out, written in his unsteady hand. "My daughter, if one day you meet someone who can see me with both love and anger, keep them close. Only such a person understands what forgiveness truly is." I smiled softly and folded the note. Outside, the night wind drifted through the window frame, carrying the scent of wet grass and distant rain. I closed my eyes and listened. In the darkness, I could almost hear my father's voice. "Well done, my girl." And I understood then. Faith doesn't come from what we know, but from the moment we dare to believe, even while we're still afraid. The afternoon drifted by slowly, the sunlight fading like blood being drawn from a body. I sat in the kitchen, listening to the ticking clock. Each movement of the hand was like the house letting out a sigh. Since my father died, there had been no other sound here but the sound of time. Gabriel arrived when the light had already changed color. He brought a wooden box, old, its edges flaking, a faint, dusty handprint on the lid. He said nothing as he handed it to me, only looked at me with a mix of hesitation and certainty about what could no longer be avoided. "Your father left this," he said. "I found it in the sealed asset storage. The box isn't on the official inventory. Maybe he wanted someone, just one person, to open it." I looked at the box, feeling as if I were holding a portion of memory that wasn't yet allowed to breathe. I asked softly, "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," he said, eyes fixed on the box. "But if you're not ready, I'll leave it here." "I'm ready," I said, though the voice sounded like someone else's. I loosened the black ribbon tied around the box. The lid clicked, wood striking wood with a dry knock. A thin veil of dust lifted, carrying the smell of old paper, bled ink, and the faint scent of tobacco. The familiar smell of my father. Inside lay a cloth-bound notebook, dark blue, a family photograph torn in half, and a small key tied with red thread. I picked up the photograph first. It had been taken in the old garden. I was 17. Sophie stood on my father's other side, and all three of us were smiling. But my sister's face had been ripped clean away, leaving a torn white void, sharp and cold. The tear wasn't accidental. It was neat, decisive, like an act carefully weighed. I asked gently, "Did my father do this?" Gabriel looked closely, then nodded. "He tore it and kept it. I think it was his way of punishing himself." I set the photo down and opened the notebook. On the first page was written, "Diary of a Bad Father." I read it aloud. My voice came out small, snagging in my throat. The first pages were filled with fragments. work, meetings, names, numbers. But the farther I read, the shakier the handwriting became, the heavier the meaning. I thought honor was a shelter. I didn't know it was a shackle. Every mistake began when I tried to salvage things by staying silent. On the next page, the ink was darker, the sentences compressed. The pension fund was born of good intentions. But when numbers learn to lie, goodness becomes tainted too. I planned to make it right the next year and the year after. While I waited, others lost everything. One of them was Gabriel Stone's father. I stopped and looked up. Gabriel stared at the floor, his hand gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles went white. He said quietly, "I know he didn't mean it, but my father didn't live long enough to wait for next year." I couldn't find any words. I only heard something small inside me, maybe my father's voice, maybe my own, crack softly but deep. I turned another page. I met Gabriel and saw in his eyes a question that needed no words. "Are you sorry?" I taught him to be an honest accountant, thinking it was a way to atone. But teaching someone else to be decent doesn't cleanse your own hands. You're only wiping blood away with your own guilt. I felt tears fall onto the margin. The ink feathered, but the words were still legible. I tore Sophie's face from the photo because I feared she would collapse. She idolized me, and I was no longer worthy. I chose to lie, thinking silence would hurt less than truth. I was wrong. Silence is a dull knife. It keeps cutting and refuses to stop. At the end, on the final page, the handwriting trembled most. "Alyssa, if you're reading this, I'm gone. You're the one I believe can heal this wound. Forgive your father and your sister." I closed the notebook and held it to my chest. For the first time in months, I wept out loud, not because I'd lost him, but because at last I could see him. Not an icon, not a victim, but a man. Weak, remorseful, striving, and afraid. Gabriel said nothing. When I looked up, he said, "There's a key." I took the small key and opened the false bottom of the box. A thin wooden panel popped up, and beneath it lay an old cassette tape, the label in my father's hand. "Last words, your mother's birthday." I looked at the tape the way you look at a heart that's stopped but still warm. "I'll listen to it," I said. "But not here, at the summer house." Gabriel nodded. "That's the right place." We were quiet. Suddenly my phone rang, the sound cutting through the air, the name on the screen. "Sophie." I answered, my heart racing. "Sophie?" Her voice was cold, but it quivered. "What are you doing, Alyssa?" "I'm just looking into a few things Father left behind." "Stop right now." Her voice hardened. "He didn't want you to dig it up. You'll only make everything worse. Or are you afraid I'll find something?" A long silence. Then she said softly, choked, "He tore my face from the photo, didn't he?" I gripped the phone. Yes. He didn't do it out of hate. He did it out of love. He was afraid I'd hate him for the rest of my life. And I did. Her voice faltered. "Don't keep searching, Alyssa. We're all tired. But I need to understand. I want to know why he apologized to both of us." The line went quiet. Then only her voice, small like a farewell. Some wounds should be allowed to heal only in silence. The call ended. I stared at the black screen, feeling abandoned between two figures. My father in the past, Sophie somewhere behind me. Gabriel set his hand on the table and asked gently, "Are you all right?" "I don't know," I said. "But it seems I have to go on, whether I'm all right or not." He nodded slightly. "If you go, I'll go with you." I looked at him. "Not to protect me, right?" No, he said, his voice low, to protect the truth. Dusk spilled through the doorway, laying a pale ribbon of orange across the table. I retied the ribbon around the box, as if stitching up a wound that had just been opened. Before he left, Gabriel took a folded slip of paper from his pocket. I found this among the old files. Your father wrote down this address. Maybe it's where the other key fits another lock. I took the paper and read the faded line. Summer House, Larchfield Lake. My heart clenched. That was where he used to take us every holiday. When Gabriel was gone, I was alone in the house. The wind nudged the window. The scent of jasmine drifted in, mixing with the old smell of paper and wood. I looked at my father's coat still hanging on the chair, then at the torn photograph. I pressed a fingertip to the white gap where Sophie's face had been and whispered, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting, you know. It's remembering without the pain." I put the box into my backpack, turned off the light, and stood at the door. My reflection in the glass was dim, but deeper somehow. I knew I was going back to where all the secrets began, and maybe where they would end. Before locking up, I looked around the kitchen one last time. "I'm going, Dad," I murmured, not to accuse, but to understand. Outside, the wind was cold. I zipped the backpack and stepped onto the porch. It was nearly dark, and the road toward the summer house stretched out like a band of memory. Under the street lamp, dust glittered. Each footfall sounded softly on the tiles, syncing with my breath. The box in my backpack was as heavy as another heart of mine. But for the first time in months, I didn't feel it weighing me down. I felt I was carrying a piece of my father, the true part, the fragile part, the part he had never dared to show anyone. I walked on, and in the wind I seemed to hear his voice. "My daughter, if the truth hurts you, let it hurt. Pain is also a way to know you're still alive." The road to the summer house wound through rows of pines, long and silent, like a forgotten fragment of memory. The sky was a dull gray, the clouds thick, as though autumn were holding its breath before surrendering to winter. I drove with both hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. In the seat beside me, Gabriel sat quietly, eyes fixed ahead, deep, far, into the mist. The wooden box rested in my backpack between us. It was small, but strangely heavy, as if it carried all the unspoken weight of the past. I could hear the tires hissing on the wet road, the low hum of the engine, and somewhere in my mind, my father's voice echoed, "If you want to understand, don't ask others. Go to where it all began." Gabriel turned slightly toward me. "When was the last time you were there?" 8 years ago, I replied, eyes on the road. "After Mom's funeral. Dad took me and Sophie there, but she only stayed 2 days before leaving. No one's been back since." He nodded, as if he already knew the answer. People avoid the places where they were once happy, because in those places, pain echoes louder. The words sent a faint shiver through me. I lowered the window slightly. The wind swept in, carrying the scent of wet grass and the whistling of wind through the old pines. The smell of the past rushed back, raw, wild, and stinging. When we arrived, the sun was low. The house stood among the trees, half in shadow, half in the fading light. The white paint had yellowed. The windows were dim with dust. Moss crept along the porch roof. And yet, there was something gentle about it, like an old soul quietly guarding its secrets. I stopped the car. We sat in silence for a moment before Gabriel spoke. "Are you sure you want to listen to the tape here?" "I'm sure," I said. If he left it behind, It's because he wanted me to hear it here. The main door creaked open. Cold air rushed out, heavy with the smell of damp wood. Inside, the room was almost untouched. The same wooden table, the old fireplace, the framed photo of my parents on the bookshelf. My chest tightened. Gabriel stepped in first, switching on his flashlight. "Let's clear a space," he said. I nodded, gathering fallen curtains, wiping the dust from the table. Our movements were slow, deliberate, as if we were afraid that touching too hard might make the house crumble. When we were done, I set the box on the table and took out the cassette. A tape recorder sat in a drawer, the one my father had used for his business meetings. I put in new batteries and pressed play. A soft hiss filled the air, followed by a long silence, just breathing. Then his voice came, deep, weary, and so familiar it nearly broke me. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm no longer with you. I don't know what you'll think of me, but I want you to understand. No mistake is born of malice, only of fear." I closed my eyes as his voice went on. "I was afraid of losing your trust, afraid that one day, when you looked at me, you'd see only a liar. But in the end, that fear made it true." A pause. Then his voice grew softer. "I took part of the pension fund to save the company, to keep hundreds of people employed. But the cost was that a few lost everything, including Gabriel Stone's father. I went to him, wanting to apologize, but I couldn't. When he died, I knew my guilt would never wash away." Beside me, Gabriel lowered his head, his hands clasped tightly together, eyes closed. I watched his fingers tremble. "Sophie knew," my father's voice continued. "She found out sooner than I thought, but she chose silence. She was afraid the truth would destroy what was left of our family. I asked her to keep the secret, and in doing so, I made my daughter my accomplice." A chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, every piece fit. Sophie's distant eyes, her guarded voice, the years of cold civility. "Alyssa," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "You've always trusted people, always believed in goodness. Maybe that's why I believe only you can forgive. If you choose to hear this tape, don't stop at anger. Be braver than I was. Speak, don't hide." His breathing grew heavier, then softer. "I love you both. But love means nothing without truth. Forgive me. And forgive each other." The tape clicked. The static droned, then went silent. I sat motionless, tears falling unnoticed. Gabriel reached out, switched off the recorder, and sat beside me. Neither of us spoke. The fire we had lit earlier flickered in the fireplace, throwing gold light across his face, merging our shadows on the wall. "He wasn't evil," I whispered, "just weak." "And in that weakness," Gabriel said, "he still tried to help you understand." I watched the fire dance, remembering everything. My father, Sophie, all the years wrapped in silence. I didn't know if what I felt was pain or release. Maybe both. I stood and stepped outside. Night had settled. The air was cold, clear, and so still I could hear the whisper of wind through the leaves. Somewhere nearby, in a park, children were laughing, distant but bright. I smiled faintly. "Do you hear that?" I asked. "The children?" he said. "Yes." I looked up at the sky. I can't remember the last time I heard laughter without feeling sad. Maybe this is what it feels like to be alive again. Gabriel joined me at the railing. "The feeling of forgiveness," he said, "starts when you forgive yourself." I turned to him, our eyes meeting. "Can you forgive my father?" He was silent so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said quietly, I don't know, but I'm trying, and that's the best I can do. I nodded. Then let's try together. We went back inside. Before sitting down, I took my father's journal and placed it on the table. He was afraid of the truth, I said. I'm not. I'll give this to Sophie. She needs to know her sister isn't afraid anymore. Gabriel smiled faintly. Maybe that's exactly what your father wanted. I folded the torn photo and tucked it into the journal. The picture will be whole again, if only in memory. Night deepened. Outside, fog blanketed the forest. Moonlight seeped through the window, brushing across our hands. I didn't know where the road ahead would lead, but for the first time, I wanted to follow it. Softly I spoke, to my father, to the quiet. I'm not chasing perfection anymore, Dad. I just want peace. The wind stirred the window gently, and in that hush, I could almost hear his voice. Distant, but warm. That's enough. Morning at the summer house opened with a heavy silence, thick as fog. The smell of damp wood mixed with resin, and I felt as if the house itself were holding its breath. Gabriel was already up, standing before my father's old study, the room I used to avoid looking at whenever I came here. The door was ajar, dust thick on the brass handle. I pushed lightly. The hinge creaked. The old scent rushed out, dry ink, yellowed paper, and a faint trace of the cigarettes my father used to smoke. On the desk stood my mother's photo frame, tilted because the glass had loosened in its mount. My hand brushed it. Dust clung to my skin like ash. There's a locked compartment here, Gabriel said, sitting down beside me. He pointed to the edge of the desk, where a small combination lock was hidden in the wood grain. Do you know the code? I didn't have to think. Mother's birthday. My fingers turned the numbers, 1007. The click sounded dry and decisive. The drawer slid open. Inside were a thick envelope, a cassette wrapped in a velvet pouch, and a small bunch of keys tied with red thread. On the slip of paper clipped to them, a shaky hand had written, Room under the cellar. I sat down and opened the envelope. The paper had yellowed. The handwriting trembled slightly. My daughter, beneath this house lies a truth I didn't have time to clear away. I once believed silence was protection. It turned out to be only a way to delay pain. If you still remember your mother's numbers, it means you are ready. I'm sorry to put this burden in your hands. Not everyone is gentle enough to open locks with love. I folded the letter. My hands were trembling a little. Gabriel looked at me, quiet, steady. I nodded. The cellar. The cellar door was at the end of the hallway, hidden beneath a faded rug. Gabriel pulled it back. A green patinated brass lock showed plain. A small key from the bunch fit perfectly. He turned it. The wooden hatch popped up, and a cold, damp smell spilled out like a trapped breath. I switched on the flashlight. Dust glittered in the beam. Old wooden steps sloped down into a thick darkness. Below was a low-ceilinged room with rough stone walls mottled with moss, cardboard boxes and tilted wooden shelves. In the far corner, an old metal cabinet, its paint flaking in patches. The padlock was small and round and brighter than anything around it. I slid in a key and turned. A soft click sounded. Inside were thick binders labeled Pension Fund, Reserves, Reconciliation Reports, Remediation Plan, 2017. At the bottom of the cabinet, clipped beneath a piece of stiff backing, was a small recorder with a label, Full Confession. I drew a breath. We listen here, I said. We sat on the stone floor, the flashlight glinting off the dust. I pressed play. The hiss stretched. Then my father's low, hoarse voice filled the air. Alyssa, if you've made it down here, it means you've done what I couldn't. Looked straight at the lowest place in this house and in your father. He paused for a few seconds, as if to breathe. I knew about the fund's shortfall earlier than the reports. I signed a temporary loan to shore up liquidity, thinking I'd repay it the next quarter. But each time I said next quarter, another old man lost one more season waiting. Gabriel's father kept waiting, then missed his surgery. He didn't scold me. He only said, "Don't let anyone else put their trust in the wrong place again." That sentence followed me all my life. I looked at Gabriel. His lips were pressed tight, his hand clenched, but his eyes stayed on the recorder. My father's voice went on. Sophie found out. She's good at hearing the spaces between words. I begged her to keep quiet, promised I'd fix it. But the more I promised, the heavier it got. The night I tore the photograph, I thought I was protecting her from me. In truth, I only cut away half our family's face. If you still can, bring all this into the light. Silence doesn't make a wound disappear. It only makes the rot worse. The tape stopped. The cellar fell silent again. I looked up, about to say something, when the floorboards above us creaked. A figure stood on the stairs. "Sophie?" I blurted. My sister stood there, fingers gripping the lip of the hatch, her face gaunt. The flashlight's beam struck her eyes, making them shine. "You opened it," she said, her voice rasping. "Yes," I said. "I had to know." Sophie came down 2 steps and stopped. "Why, Alyssa? Why not let it lie?" "Because it never lay quietly," I said. "We just pretended not to hear it." She gave a thin laugh. "You think I didn't know? I've heard his voice every night, inside my head." "Then why were you silent?" "Because I tried to speak," she whispered. "But when I heard his voice, I knew the house inside me would collapse. I kept quiet so it would stand." "The house stood," I said softly. "But no one lived there." Sophie lowered her head. Her shoulders trembled. The words struck something deep. When she looked up, her eyes were wet. "What do you want?" "We bring everything up," I said slowly. "Let the truth be seen. And the family, we mend it ourselves." She looked at me, then nodded. "Let's go up." We carried the recorder and the files to the living room. Noon light poured through the windows, falling in golden bars. I set the device on the table and pressed play. Our father's voice rose again. Sophie shook when she heard her name. Gabriel clasped his hands and bowed his head. When the tape ended, no one spoke. I could hear the wind along the porch. Sophie gave a small laugh through falling tears. He still thought an apology was enough. "No," I said. "He thought an apology was a beginning." She stepped forward and laid a hand on the recorder. "I hate that he turned me into a keeper of keys," she said. "But I hate more the thought of you living blind." I took her hand and said gently, "My eyes are open now." Gabriel spoke, his voice low and measured. "The truth saves no one on the first day, but it stops new wounds from forming." Sophie looked at him, then nodded, her lips tightening. Light from the doorway picked out a few silver strands in her hair. I gathered the files and clipped them into a folder. "Tomorrow, I'll take these to Attorney Whitaker." "I'm coming with you," Sophie said at once, as if afraid she might change her mind. I smiled. "Before we go, let's listen once more. Not to judge, just to be there together." The 3 of us put on headphones. Our father's voice came soft, warm, trembling. I closed my eyes and listened to each breath in my ears. When the tape stopped, Sophie hugged me, hard. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know," I whispered. Gabriel stood quietly by the window, light washing over his face. Outside, the pines stirred. The wind matched our breathing. I lifted my gaze to my father's photograph on the shelf, where the sunlight split it into half light, half shadow. Softly, to no one in particular, I said, "I've pulled the truth up out of the ground, Dad. The rest, we'll learn to stand in the light ourselves." The breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of resin and sun-warm air. In that moment, I felt I could hear his voice, far away but clear. "Well done, my girl." I smiled and closed my eyes. For the first time, the house truly breathed. Afternoon at the summer house carried a pale gold, like a thin thread stretched across the pines. The sun tilted, casting long shadows on the window frame. I stood before the wooden table piled with files, the papers my father had left mixed together. Originals stacked with yellowed scraps of notes. The smell of old paper and dust and a hint of resin mingled with the damp lingering from the fireplace just gone out. The air was dense, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Sophie stood by the window, back straight, arms folded. Light fell across half her face, revealing eyes that were tired yet taut with strain. Gabriel sat in the chair opposite, turning a cup of cold tea in his hands, silent. We had listened to my father's tape 3 times. The first time, Sophie burst into tears. The second, Gabriel left the room. The third, I stopped halfway. Not because I couldn't bear it anymore, but because my father's voice had begun to feel eerily familiar, as if he were still somewhere in this house, watching us, waiting for a verdict. "Stay here tonight," I said softly, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Tomorrow morning we give the files to Whitaker. It ends there." Sophie turned, her gaze cold and bright as glass. "No, Alyssa, it doesn't end there. It ends when you stop." I frowned. "Stop what?" "Stop dragging everything into the light," she said slowly, each word dropping heavy. "You want justice? Justice doesn't save anyone's soul. It only gives people more to whisper about." I drew a breath, keeping my tone even. "I'm not after justice. I'm after the truth. People only whisper when we stay silent." She gave a faint laugh, tired, edged with bitterness. "That sounds lovely. You talk like a book." He apologizes, and you turn his apology into a moral ticket. I met her eyes. "You think I'm doing this for the sake of virtue?" "No. I'm doing it because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life living in this house of lies." Her face flickered. "And you think I haven't? I've lived with those lies every day, every night, every time the wind bangs the door. I think someone's come knocking. I lived afraid so you could live in peace." I stepped closer, my voice dropping. "And that's why you're this exhausted. You don't have to hold it anymore. It's time to let the house breathe." "No," Sophie said, hard. "I have my own way." A long silence fell. I saw her lips tremble, as if she were holding something tight in her chest. Afternoon light slanted through the window, touching her cheek and revealing a salty track, not yet dry. "You called Whitaker already, didn't you?" she asked suddenly. I nodded. "I did." "And you think that's noble?" "No, I just think it's being an adult." "An adult?" She let out a small, choked, joyless laugh. "Being an adult is choosing the lesser evil. I chose silence." "No," I said slowly. "Silence is never the lesser evil. It's cowardice, wrapped in polite reasoning. Sophie looked at me for a long time, then turned away. She came to the table and flipped through the files, her fingers sliding over sheet after sheet, until they stopped at a crumpled red folder. Lifting it, she asked in a hoarse voice, "Do you know what this is?" "A reconciliation report," I said. "Right." She looked straight at me. "And there are places I altered." The room seemed to freeze. Gabriel looked up, eyes wide in shock. I moved closer, slowly. "You altered it?" "Yes," Sophie said. "After Mom's funeral, when you still believed Dad was perfect. I adjusted a few numbers. I thought if the papers were clean, the world would be clean." "Oh, God," I breathed. "Yes," she said, her voice hollow. "I betrayed the truth, not to save him, but to keep you, to preserve your faith." Gabriel spoke, voice rough. "You preserved it by tearing another piece away." Sophie said nothing. I looked at her for a long moment, then spoke gently. "You're not a bad person. You were afraid. But fear can't excuse betrayal." She lifted her head, her eyes red. "I know. And I know you're going to turn everything over." "No," I said. "I'll do something else first." "What?" I opened my arms. "I'm going to hug you." Sophie stood frozen for a few seconds. Then slowly, she set the file down and stepped into my arms. Her body was rigid as wood, her breath ragged. I held her tighter and whispered, "No, Sophie. We're not doing this to punish anyone. We're ending the lies." She broke down, tears soaking my shoulder. "I'm afraid of losing you, Alyssa. Afraid you'll look at me like a criminal." I stroked her hair, my voice thick. "I'll only ever see you as the one who held up the whole sky to keep the rain off me. Now it's my turn to hold it with you." "When we let each other go," Sophie said quietly, "tomorrow they'll ask who altered the books. I'll say it was me." "No," I shook my head. "We'll say it together, because I stayed silent. And silence is a crime too." Sophie held my gaze for a long time, then nodded. "All right." Gabriel stepped forward, gathering the files. "I'll sort the order tonight. Tomorrow we go together." I nodded, a small smile touching my lips. Outside, wind rustled through the pines, the scent of resin blending with damp earth drifting in. Sophie picked up the torn family photo, set it between our father's journal pages, and smoothed the ripped edge. "Remember when we took this photo?" she asked softly. "A summer evening," I said, smiling. "Dad made us stand close. I was laughing because the mosquitoes bit. And I was jealous," Sophie murmured. "Jealous of how he looked at you, like you were the piece he never had." She looked up, her voice deepening. "Maybe that's why I wanted to be the wall. If there wasn't peace, at least there was a wall." "No more walls," I said. "Now there are only doors." "Doors?" "Windows. To let the wind in." Sophie smiled, the first real smile in years. "Yes, let the wind in." We started arranging the files. I read. Gabriel cross-checked. Sophie wrote the statement. 3 people, 3 breaths, but the same rhythm. We stoked the fireplace again. The gold firelight flickered on the walls, our shadows merging. I poured tea and set a cup before my sister. "If they ask you tomorrow why you altered the books, I'll say, because I loved the wrong way," she answered without hesitation. "And I said, will say, because I stayed silent too long." Gabriel took a sip of tea, his eyes gentle. "And I'll say, because at last, I understand justice cannot be separated from compassion." I nodded. "Then tomorrow, we bring both." Outside, night wrapped everything. I drew the curtains, leaving a slit for moonlight to spill in. The wind slipped through, making the papers on the table tremble. My father's letter lay still. The photo, now mended, showed its torn edge glinting with firelight. Sophie leaned back in her chair and said softly, "Thank you." Gabriel smiled. "Thank you for letting me be here, not as a judge, but as someone witnessing the healing." I answered quietly, "We've done the hardest thing. We've stopped lying to one another." The room settled into stillness. The fireplace crackled, the wind moved along the porch, and somewhere, the insect's song folded into our breathing. For the first time, this house wasn't a grave for secrets, but a place where truth could live. I looked out the window, where moonlight drenched the pines. Inside, something unwound, light as thread. I knew tomorrow wouldn't be easy, but at least we were ready. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night, "No, Sophie, we've ended the lies, and this is the first day of the truth." Morning unfolded in a soft gray light over the pines. The wind slipped through the eaves, carrying the scent of resin and damp earth left from the night's rain. I woke early, stepped out onto the porch, and felt the cold seep through the soles of my feet. From afar, the lake appeared like a blurred mirror, reflecting a sky still undecided in color. Inside, Sophie was making coffee. The spoon clinked against the cup, a sound like a quiet countdown. Gabriel sat at the table, organizing the finished stack of documents. None of us spoke, but the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was the silence of preparation for what was coming, for a choice that couldn't be undone. Sophie placed a hot cup before me. "Are you sure?" she asked. I nodded. "If we don't do it today, we never will. And if we do," she said with a faint, weary smile, "we won't be the same family anymore." "Maybe," I replied. "But maybe we'll finally be a real one." Gabriel looked up, his voice low and steady. "Truth doesn't destroy what's built on trust. It only breaks what's built on fear." His words silenced Sophie. She turned toward the window, where the first light filtered through the forest. I saw her hand tighten around her cup until her knuckles turned white. For a moment, I knew she was still afraid. But for the first time, she wasn't running from it. I took the folder, the stiff cover cool in my hands. "Let's go." Gabriel's old car moved slowly along the road by the lake. Outside, the scenery slid by. Small houses, a man walking his dog, a few children tossing stones across the water. I watched them, struck by how long it had been since I'd noticed the simple sound of children's laughter. Sophie sat in the back seat, silent, turning the ring on her finger. I knew she was rehearsing what she might say to the lawyer. Gabriel drove with his eyes on the road, but every so often he checked the rear-view mirror, as if to make sure we were still all right. By the time we reached Whitaker's office, the sun was at its peak. The old lawyer was waiting, his eyes kind but sharp. He looked at the folder, then at me. "Alyssa, are you certain you want to submit these? Some of this could reopen the investigation into your father's case." I drew a breath. He left everything to me. That means he trusted I'd do what he couldn't. Whitaker nodded slowly. "You're like him in that way, willing to face things." I handed him the files. Gabriel added his statement of confirmation. Sophie sat beside me, eyes lowered, but I could see her shoulders no longer trembling. When the receipt was signed, I felt as if a great stone had rolled from my hands. The room seemed lighter. I turned to Sophie. "It's done." She didn't speak. She just nodded, lips trembling slightly. tears threatening but held back. We stepped outside. The midday sun was harsh, exposing everything. I inhaled deeply, feeling the heat sting my skin, but it wasn't unpleasant. It was the breath of the present, of life returning. Gabriel squinted up at the sky. We should go home. Home? I asked. He smiled faintly. Where it all began. On the drive back, Sophie sat beside me, her hands still clasped. Alyssa? She said softly. Do you regret it? No, I answered. Do you? She was quiet for a long time. I don't know, but I feel lighter. Maybe for the first time. The car stopped in front of the summer house. The sun stood high, gold spilling over the roof and the forest behind it. Everything looked the same, only we were different. We walked around to the back, to the small patch of earth where Father's tree stood. It was taller than I remembered, its trunk leaning toward the lake, young leaves glinting in the light. I touched the bark, cool, rough, alive. Gabriel brought out a watering can. Sophie crouched, loosening the soil around the roots with her hands. Together, we watered it. The stream of water flowed down, seeping into the ground, vanishing beneath the surface. I watched it soak in, thinking of all the years behind us. The silence, the lies, the times we turned away. The water sank slowly but steadily, like forgiveness. Gabriel murmured, "This tree survived because its roots are deep. Families do too." I smiled faintly, but roots need to breathe. Sophie rose, dusting her hands. Her voice was hoarse, but lighter. Maybe now it finally can. I looked at her. In the sunlight, her face seemed softer. Still strong, but learning to release. I put my hand on her shoulder. Thank you for staying. I almost didn't, she said. But then I thought, you'd be here, and I didn't want you to face the truth alone. Gabriel took out 3 pairs of headphones. I think we should listen to the tape one last time, not to judge, but to understand. We sat on the stone bench by the porch. The tape began, Father's voice deep, weak, but warm. If you hear this, forgive me. The truth doesn't destroy us. It only clears away the dust I left too long. When the final words faded, none of us spoke. Sophie exhaled, leaning her head on my shoulder. Gabriel sat beside us, eyes closed as if praying in silence. I looked out across the open sky. Noon light spread over the garden, bright but gentle. A sparrow darted past and landed on a young branch, singing. Warmth bloomed in my chest. He was right, I whispered. The truth doesn't ruin us, it redeems us. Gabriel opened his eyes and met mine. And forgiveness isn't a gift for others. I nodded. It's a gift we give ourselves. Sophie smiled, a quiet, sunlit smile. The 3 of us stood, facing the lake. Sunlight shimmered on the water, glinting like fragments of a broken mirror put back together. In that moment, I understood. Family isn't the place without mistakes. It's the place where people choose to stay after seeing everything. I went inside, took the old photo frame and set it on the table. Inside, the torn family photo had been mended. The rip still showed, but it no longer mattered. Beside it, I placed a new picture. The 3 of us, taken that morning, our smiles imperfect but real. I looked at the 2 photos side by side, as if 2 moments in time were speaking to each other. The past gazing at the present smiling back. Light streamed through the window, touching both pictures, making them glow. I clasped my hands, whispering in my heart, Father, I finally understand. Not everyone who tells the truth is forgiven, but no one can be fully loved while still lying. The curtain stirred with the wind. In its rustle, I thought I heard his laughter, faint but familiar. Outside, his tree glimmered in the midday sun, and I knew that within us, something had truly begun again. Slowly, quietly, but steadfastly, like groundwater moving deep beneath the earth. Noon draped the summer house in a golden silk shawl, warm and thin. A light wind moved through the pines, the leaves brushing one another like an old melody. I sat on the porch with a cup of cold tea in my hand, watching light dance across the ground. Inside, Sophie and Gabriel were sorting the last folders to be sent off. The house felt different now. No more damp smell, no more cramped sense of holding a secret. Everything was still old, but clean and bright. Somehow, truth had swept through every crack in the walls, every plank of wood, every dark corner, leaving behind not emptiness, but a gentle kind of peace. I heard Sophie's footsteps coming onto the porch. She brought a thick stack of papers and set it on the table. "Whitaker says he submitted the full file to the committee," she said. "All the legal procedures will be handled over the next few weeks." I nodded. "We've done our part." "Yes," she exhaled, long and light. "Now we wait." Gabriel appeared behind us with 3 glasses of orange juice. "And we keep living," he said, his low voice carrying softly through the quiet. We sat together. Light cut across the doorway, falling over our faces, picking out the beads of sweat, the fine lines, the marks of the long road we had just walked. No one said anything more. This silence was unlike all the others before. No longer restraint, but a form of understanding. I looked at my sister and asked quietly, "Do you feel any regret?" Sophie was silent a few seconds, then answered slowly and steadily, "No, only sorrow. I wish we'd done this sooner." I smiled. "But if we had, maybe we wouldn't have been brave enough to bear it." She nodded. "Maybe." Gabriel leaned back, gaze far away. "Forgiveness is never the business of yesterday. It only happens when people are tired enough to have no strength left for hate." I looked at him, half teasing, half earnest. "You talk like someone who's already forgiven." "Not quite," he said, "but I'm practicing. And maybe that's how forgiveness starts." His words tightened my throat. I turned the teacup in my hands, watching small rings ripple and fade, like images of everything that had passed. In the afternoon, we cleaned the house together. Sophie and I gathered our father's old things. His notebook, a few pens, a pocket watch. Some we kept. Others we wrapped carefully to donate. Each time a lid closed, it felt like boxing up a portion of memory. Not to forget it, but to let it rest. Gabriel fixed the back window, the hinge that had creaked for years. He said nothing, just worked quietly, his hands dusty with wood shavings. Light struck the nape of his neck, drawing a faint margin of brightness around him that made him look unusually at peace. Sophie opened a drawer and found a small, worn leather notebook. Inside was our father's handwriting. "If one day you find this notebook, don't ask why I chose to hide. Ask why I believed you would be strong enough to find." She closed it and handed it to me. "Keep it, Alyssa. It belongs to you." I took it, then shook my head. "No, you keep it. Father always believed you were stronger than me." She looked at me, emotion filling her eyes, then nodded. "For the first time in my life, I think I'm strong enough to hold on to something without being afraid." The afternoon tilted. We went out to the garden, to the tree our father had planted. Yesterday, we'd watered it. Today, its leaves looked greener, the sun glittering across each small canopy. The 3 of us stood quietly at the base. Gabriel brought 3 small spades. "I think we should plant another tree," he said. A worthy beginning. I smiled, taking a spade. This one will belong to all three of us. We dug a small hole beside the first tree. The soil was soft, richly damp. As we set the sapling in, Sophie said gently, "Don't plant it too close. Let the roots have space. People need that too." Gabriel laughed. A fine gardening philosophy. I poured water. It ran down and soaked in, the sunlight catching it into little shards of glass. Looking into that shimmer, I felt my father's image grow fainter in my mind, but no longer painful. When we finished, Sophie took a new photo from her pocket. The three of us, taken this morning. "Let's put it on Father's old desk?" I nodded. "Exactly there." We went inside and placed the photo beside the old frame. In one was Father, Mother, the two of us. In the other, the three who remain in the present. The two pictures stood side by side, separated by a crack in time. But in the noon light, they seemed to be smiling at each other. I sat down, feeling the odd sensation of a chapter closing. No more anger, no more blame, only a gentle weariness, like after a long journey. Sophie laid a hand on my shoulder. "You know, Alyssa, Father once said something I never understood until today." "What was it?" "People don't truly grow up when they learn how to win, but when they learn, they don't need to win anymore." I smiled softly. "He'd probably be proud of us." Gabriel said, "Or at least, he'd be at peace." Out on the porch, noon light was radiant, warm enough to feel like a touch. I opened the door and stepped outside, the sun laying a light sting across my skin, gentle, not harsh. I turned back to Sophie and Gabriel. They stepped out too, standing at my side. We were quiet. Nothing more needed saying. It was enough. I lifted my face and drew a deep breath. The air was clear, the scent of fresh-cut grass, of resin, and of memories dissolving. In my head, I heard my father's voice one last time from the tape. "The truth doesn't destroy us. It has saved us." I echoed softly in reply. "Forgiveness isn't a gift we give to others. It's a gift we give ourselves." Sophie took my hand. Gabriel stood beside us, a brief smile touching his lips. A light wind stirred the new tree's branches. A few leaves fell and spun in the sun, like fragments of a past being carried off by the breeze. I knew that life ahead would still hold storms, pain, and trials. But at least, we had learned how to stand in the light without fear. In the distance, the lake sparkled under the noon sun. The sky was wide, blue, cloudless. I squinted upward, and for the first time, instead of thinking about what was lost, I thought about what remained. My voice slipped into the open air. "Dad, I did it. Not perfectly, but truthfully. And I think that's the best way to live." The wind swept gently through, stroking my hair like an answer. Inside the house, the two photos on the table quivered slightly in the breeze, the light along the glass edges forming a golden halo, like the smile of a father far away, finally at rest. Not every act of revenge needs blood or tears. Some unfold in silence. When we choose to live better, when we refuse to let someone else's pain define who we are. Alyssa didn't defeat anyone. She only conquered the darkness within herself. And sometimes, that is the only victory worth living for. If you've ever been hurt by someone you once loved, try what Alyssa did. Look straight at the wound, call it by its name, and then let it go. Not to forget, but to heal. Because forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the gentlest form of revenge a grown heart can choose. And you? If you were in Alyssa's place, would you forgive? Or stay silent like Sophie? Leave your thoughts below, not to argue, but to listen. Who knows? Among these words, someone may find the peace they lost long ago.